Why, hello. It's such a privilege to be with you today. In case we haven't met before, my name is Pelumi, and I've really found this relationship-based series that we've been doing on God's guide to getting along really, really helpful for me. Helpful for me in situations that have to do with my wider family as I co-lead the Bracknell site with Becky Oliver. And even in my deeper conversations with a lot of my friends recently, it's really been helpful because it's given me tools to interact with everyone and to just press forward in our relationships. Whether I've been glad, mad, or sad, and had those conversations, what I've seen is that God just continues to bless me with opportunities to press in and to continue to work out these relationships. Now, in the course of this series, some of the things that we've discussed is how to love people, it's how to deal with our emotions, how to speak up rather than guessing, and how to listen and to really, really listen. And today we want to talk about how to argue and to do that really well. Now, we want to do this in a good way when we're arguing. And to help us to look at this a little bit deeper, what I would like to do is introduce you to a couple of characters who have been developed for the marriage course by Nick and Silla Lee. And these characters are, as I introduce them to you, my little friends. And the first person is right now the rhino. Now, when you look at a rhino and you see how sturdy and strong it is, what it tends to do is it charges when it's facing conflict. So a person who is like a rhino tends to charge into the conflict head on. Their behavior is to confront the issues directly and sometimes really aggressively. You know, they value honesty and they want to seek resolution. But sometimes their approach can intimidate others and they can escalate tension and sometimes overlook emotional nuances. Now, the rhino wants to fix things and it wants to fix things right now. But sometimes it's really fast and it's loud and it can end up scaring others away. Now, do you know anyone who is like the rhino? Are you like the rhino? And yeah, consider that. Now, the other character I'd really like to tell you about is Heidi the hedgehog. When there's a problem, Heidi the hedgehog wants to roll up into a ball, just crawl and hide. And because it's scared, it really doesn't want to peek out. Now, a person who is like the hedgehog wants to withdraw. He really doesn't want to talk at that time. He wants to just shut things down and avoid the confrontation. They curl up emotionally, they become silent, and they're sometimes even passive-aggressive. They might preserve the peace and avoid any kind of escalation, but they can also suppress their emotions. They can delay resolution, and they can end up confusing others. The hedgehog just wants to hide and stay safe before talking. Now, what this does sometimes is it makes the rhino really confused. It hides so long, and the rhino becomes really upset. I wonder if you know any hedgehogs. Do you sometimes feel like a hedgehog? Well, as we go on, like a hedgehog, this is not the time for you to crawl up into a ball. Peek out and let's see what's best to do. Because the reality is that conflict isn't the problem. It's how we handle the conflict that's the real issue. What we do is when we handle conflict in a healthy manner, it helps us to build our relationships. It helps us to develop on our love. We can come across more clearly. We can be more respectful in our communication, and we can be more truthful. So these are some of the things that the rhino can learn from the hedgehog and vice versa when we think about how we handle big feelings. The rhino learns to slow down and be more gentle. The hedgehog learns to peek out and talk when ready. They both learn to listen and love each other much better. Well, the point isn't to label one as being better than the other. It's not necessarily the rhino style is the better approach or the hedgehog style is the better approach, but it's finding the balance and growing towards one another emotionally so that we can be more mature and Christ-centered in our approaches. So whatever your style is, the goal is to become more self-aware. It's for us to develop our empathy towards one another and be more patient. It's to learn to speak the truth and to speak it in love and to move towards healthy conflict resolution in all our relationships so that we can honor both truth and grace. Let me give you another picture. If you think about a fireplace, or more like a fire pit. A fire pit can be really warm, it can provide light, we can cook with it. It's well contained. But on the other hand, when you think about a forest fire, it's totally out of control. It's wreaking havoc in its path. Healthy conflict is like a fire pit. It's contained and it's helpful. Unhealthy conflict is like the wildfire. It destroys relationships. So what we want to do is we want to have healthy fire pit conversations. If we look through the Bible, we'll see that it's full of different ways which people have handled conflict in a healthy way. When Jesus had conflict with the leaders of his time, he tended to move towards healthy conflict resolution. The early church had conflict with one another. There were even splits because of this, but they learned to do this in an amiable way. So clean fighting needs to be really honest. It needs to be done without being harsh. And we can be vulnerable in this without being vague. So I'd love for us to take another look right now and into the Bible and look at a specific case. And we want to look at the story of Daniel. And his book is found in the first part of the Bible, which we call the Old Testament. So we'll read some bits from the first chapter of that book. And let me just quickly give you a little bit of a summary of what's setting up the scene. Now, there was a place far away from here, or wherever you might be, called Judah. And what happened was a king named Nebuchadnezzar, his army came, and what they did is they carted away a lot of their treasure and they took some of their people away. Now, they took some smart, good-looking, well-to-do looking young men, and they took them away. And one of them was Daniel, and he went away also with 3 of his friends to live with them there in their country in Babylon. Now, what happened is that Babylon was very different from their homeland of Judah. And what happened is that they wanted to force Daniel and his friends to be like the Babylonians. They wanted them to eat fancy and different food from the king's table, wanted them to speak a different language, and even pray to different gods. Now, the king of Babylon wanted Daniel and his friends to act just like those Babylonians, to dress like them, to talk like them, and to forget their old ways. They even gave them new names to rob them of their culture and their identity. Now, that's a thing we call assimilation. And assimilation is just a big word for the fact when someone tries to make you change the way you really are and to make them fit into another group, their group. But guess what? Daniel and his friends, they were resolute. They wanted to honor God. They wanted to do the things that God had asked them to do and just continue being obedient and faithful to him in that faraway land. They wanted to show that they still loved God and they were staying true to him. So let's go into verses 8 to 17 of Daniel chapter 1. Daniel decided not to eat the king's food and wine because that would make him unclean. So he asked Ashpenaz, who was the king's chief officer, for permission not to make himself unclean in this way. God made Ashpenaz want to be kind and merciful to Daniel. But Ashpenaz said to Daniel, I am afraid of my master, the king. He ordered me to give you this food and drink. If you don't eat this food, you will begin to look worse than other young men your age. The king will see this and he will cut off my head because of you. Ashpenaz had ordered a guard to watch Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah. Daniel said to the guard, please give us this test for 10 days. Don't give us anything but vegetables to eat and water to drink. Then after 10 days, compare us with the other young men who eat the king's food. See for yourself who looks healthier. Then you judge for yourself how you want to treat us, your servants. So the guard agreed to test them for 10 days. After 10 days, they looked very healthy. They looked better than all of the young men who ate the king's food. So the guard took away the king's special food and wine. He gave Daniel, Hananiah, Mishael, and Azariah vegetables instead. God gave these 4 men wisdom and the ability to learn. They learned many kinds of things people had written and studied. Daniel could also understand all kinds of visions and dreams. Now, here are 3 things that we can see from this passage about how Daniel dealt with the situation around him, how Daniel and his 3 friends handled that matter that they were unhappy with. Daniel and his friends decided to speak up. They decided to speak up about what he and his friends disagreed about. Because of their faith and their obedience to God above anyone else, they refused to do what was going to make them fit in with the crowd that they were in, the thing that would upset God. The other thing they did was they were not rude, they were not violent, but they remembered to be kind in their communication. They communicated their disagreement with the king's plans for that diet in a really kind way. And as part of their negotiation, they asked for permission to stick to their Jewish diets and to compare them with the others after 10 days. And the third thing they did was they stood by their decision. And they stood showing that they had a real trust in God. And they preferred to do this versus what was convenient at the time. They put their complete trust in God for the situation. So Daniel shows us how to speak up kindly and bravely when things feel hard or unfair. Even though he was far away from home and under a lot of pressure, he didn't shout, he didn't hide, and he didn't trick anyone. Instead, he trusted God, explained his beliefs really clearly, and he worked with the others to find a really good solution. Another great way that we can think about this is like when you have a wound, you tend to use really clean instruments and clean antiseptics to clean the wounds. But if you decided to use dirty ones, what would happen is that you would end up getting an infection and make things worse. So in the same way, when we're having conversations with people, we want to keep it clean so that we'll move towards really clean resolution rather than doing it in a way that causes further pain. So the same way, Daniel and his friends, they didn't run away from the conflicts. They didn't go and hide in hedgehog mode, in full hedgehog mode. They didn't come charging in very typical rhino mode, but they found that balance somewhere in the middle by arguing in a good way. So to help us remember, based on what Daniel and his friends did, there are these 3 things that him and his friends did again. They decided to speak up, to stay kind, and to trust God. So let's remember that peacemaking isn't about avoiding conflicts at all costs. Remember that Daniel didn't avoid the conflict. Jesus didn't avoid conflict when he was faced with it. He brought a kind of disruption that led to true and lasting peace. Jesus didn't ignore the tensions. He didn't ignore the differences. And like Daniel, he spoke the truth in love. And that's our goal too. So I want to ask you, what would it be like if we didn't flee from conflict, but what we did is we moved towards it, moving towards having healthy arguments and healthy disagreements. And we moved towards them with kindness, and we moved towards them with grace and truth, so that we could resolve those differences that we had in deep-seated love. What would it be like?